It's my privilege to run what we call the behavioral health track or mental health track, whatever. But it's really hard because we have asked somebody like Lucy, who's incredibly talented, really, really busy, and we asked someone like her to come and present this presentation. And I'm not going to do too much of an intro because I want her to put it in her own words. And that this amazing human being, we get the privilege of having coming here that we normally don't get a chance to do because she does it really, quite frankly, out of the goodness of her heart. This was done last year at our conference, which is super cool, and people raved about it. So this is a great opportunity. I'm going to get out of the way. I'll be in the back of the room if you need anything at all, and I'll just turn it over to you. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I want to start off by just making sure that you're in the right place, right? So this is healing from military sexual trauma, traditional and alternative methods. Let me go over some quick things real quick. So what you see in front of you right here and the two on the end, that's work from my students. This is my Invisible Wounds original mask collection. This was never supposed to be seen by anyone. I created this because a therapist kept asking me, well, what does your PTSD look like? And what is it? And she frustrated me so much that I went home and decided I'll show her. And I created a collection of what trauma looked like to me. So this is the rage. This is MST. This is PTSD, frozen in time. This one is traumatic brain injury. And though I don't have traumatic brain injury, my husband does. So I interviewed him to be able to create that mask. And that mask looks like a patina mask pulled from the ocean. That's the recovery mask because I found so much healing while surfing. And I thought it would be nice to just do one nice, fun mask after doing all of these. So that's there for you to view. That collection makes its way around the US in different places. And I made it and I put it in my garage in 2016. And I didn't think about it for years. And then I started working with Path with Art. And eventually this became a class that I now teach called Mask Making for Invisible Wounds. So just to kind of get that out of the way, what you're looking at, that's up there. So I am 4'11". I have a step. If you see me moving around, it's because I don't want to slip off the back of here and fall down. So just so we know, you will all get an electronic copy of this PDF presentation. Is this on? Now it's on? Oh, there we go. You will all get an electronic copy of the presentation. There is a wealth of information in here for a reason. And it's so that you can kind of dive into it a little bit more. So I'm not going to go over everything. I'm a Marine. I don't do the death by PowerPoint. I don't even like the PowerPoint. But we're going to go through 3 parts. So the first 2 are going to be informational. And then the third part of this training is going to be interactive. And you're all going to be working together. So I'll get to that in just a sec. Does anyone have any questions before we start? Okay. If you need to step out for any reason, just please do so. Again, we're going to be talking about military sexual trauma. Nobody gets excited about that, but the exciting part is the healing and the art. So I look forward to getting to that. So a little bit about who I am. I've got a strong commitment to veterans, and I have since I've gotten out, particularly women veterans and those who have been impacted by MST. I have a bunch of stuff that I'm involved in, but leadership and advocacy, community engagement, creative arts and healing. I have been in that for the last almost 10 years, and it's been amazing. Veteran support and public recognition. We'll go over some quick training goals. So real quick, the 3 takeaways that I want you to get from this presentation are to understand that MST is a complex and pervasive issue, and it has lasting impact on survivors and their families and their children and people they work with. It trickles down. It's having a comprehensive approach to healing from MST is definitely essential. There is no one size fits all. And creative arts engagement offers a powerful and alternative approach to healing from MST. So those are the 3 takeaways. The learning objectives. And you'll notice I'm going to try to go through some of this quickly. So I'd like you to make sure that you're leaving here understanding the nature and impact of military sexual trauma. understanding the principles of a comprehensive treatment and recovery program. And I say program because it's not, you don't get to the point where one day everything's just all healed. It's a lifelong program that's individual for everyone. And the third learning objective is understanding the benefits of arts engagement, and you'll do that at the end by working together. So like I said, this is divided into 3 parts. We're going to define, identify, analyze, and explain some of the complexities of MST. So let's figure out what exactly is MST and how does the VA define it. So the VA's definition is on the right-hand side of your screen. And the 4 key points I'd like you to understand is that, number 1, we all know this is a serious issue. It encompasses both sexual harassment and sexual assault. It can happen to anyone. And I want to repeat that. It can happen to anyone of any age, any race, any gender, from any branch of service during any era. And MST is also not a diagnosis. So it's an experience, and then one gets usually diagnosed with mental health conditions can come from that, but it is not a diagnosis. So the prevalence of MST. Studies and surveys indicate that the prevalence obviously is alarmingly high. The key findings of that are that certain groups are obviously at higher risk. 1 in 3 women veterans and 1 in 50 male veterans, when they're screened by their VA providers, report some experience with MST. There's, like I said, there's a higher prevalence among women, and a lot of the numbers are often underestimates because of non-reporting for particular factors like being afraid to report, being afraid of retaliation, things like that. So the complex and pervasive nature of MST, it is widespread, it is deeply ingrained, unfortunately, and it's also often very hidden, right? It's something that people don't talk about, or if they do talk about it, they may talk about it privately and not necessarily report it, and then 25 years later, it will come up. Some key aspects of the pervasive nature, again, we kind of just went over this, is the high rates among women, the impact that it has on men, and males are considered the most underserved population of MST survivors. Large part of that is due to not reporting, but also trying to understand how do we best serve each individual population. There are systemic and complex issues, and there is a long-lasting impact of MST, and like I said, that's not just to the individual. So some effects that we can see from MST, there's short-term and long-term, and there's kind of a mesh of those in between, right? It's not like you have short-term for a little bit and then it goes right into long-term. Sometimes these things can kind of be interchanged, but right after, you'll notice some people will exhibit things like severe anger, isolation, irritability. Some physical symptoms might be sleep disturbances, gastrointestinal issues, and that's not something that's very common or often understood, that can be related to the trauma. Behavioral issues such as substance abuse or self-harm, and it can exacerbate other mental health conditions. Some long-term things that might develop that aren't necessarily, again, so obvious is PTSD. Well, obviously PTSD, people know that one, but complicated grief. And I want to take a second and talk about grief. I should have mentioned I am also an MST survivor. So when I talk about this, this isn't just learning a bunch of facts. This is also very personal. I've recently been able to kind of explore some of the unresolved grief, and I had no idea how big and how heavy that was going to be. But complicated grief, chronic grief, delayed grief, we generally think of grief when someone's passed away. And we're very understanding when someone loses someone and they've passed away, there's a process of grieving. But we don't often understand that that can also happen with MST survivors. We've lost our ability to be in our jobs. Maybe we've lost being in the military anymore. We've lost the idea. I know I went in when I was 17 and I was out by the time I was 19. I had gone in with this idea that I'm going to do 20 years. So I lost a whole lot of that. And I think grief is something that people are just now maybe starting to associate with MST. But it is definitely important to talk about. Also, intergenerational trauma. So what the veteran goes through then can trickle down to other members of the family. And then problems at work and school, those are, again, things that might be a little bit more obvious. Let me get a drink. Can we turn the AC up? I don't know if it's just me or it's the moment, but whew, okay. So let me go ahead. Oops. All right. So part of the cultural norms that can perpetrate MST, I'm going to talk about the first three that are really obvious, and that's power, hierarchy, and rank. And those are things that I see a lot of heads nodding with some of this stuff, which is good because it means we have an understanding already. But some people don't necessarily understand that there are those cultural norms, and power being one of them. So MST as a whole isn't so much about it's more of an abuse of power than anything else. That's probably just the best way to say it. And it's often forgotten that the abuse of power part, when we're in the military, that is one of the biggest factors to why people sometimes won't report. And it's because it does threaten your job. You're not isolated to what you're doing. You're living, breathing in the culture. Even when you're done with work, you're still part of that family unit. So military training ingrains a principle of group cohesion. There's definitely blurred boundaries, right? If you work with the same people that you see at the barracks, the same people that you might go out with, the same people, like in my instance, when I went in, a lot of the people I worked for, I looked up to them like brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, right? Like these are the people that are going to look after me. So there were definitely a lot of blurred boundaries that you might not see in the civilian world. You work, you go home, and you can have a little separation. In the military, that's quite different. And then a lot of us join. How many of you joined the military out of high school? How many of you were 17 when you joined? How many of you were 18? All right. And how many of you joined because you were seeking some sense of belonging or looking for something a little bit different than the family of origin that you were raised in? Perfect. So there is an understanding for a lot of us service members that that's why we went in. But what happens is once that belongingness is disrupted by sexual assault, everything changes. And when I say everything, I mean every aspect of everything one is doing, one is thinking, everything changes when that happens. That brings me to the next slide. So I want you to take a look at this, and we're going to leave this up for just a second here because there's a lot of information. So family and the connection to understanding MST. When years ago, I worked with an organization that takes veterans out surfing, and it was the first time I worked with them, and I went to Central Coast, California, and the very first thing that they started with was, "Welcome to the family." And I was like, oh God, oh no. The last time I was ingrained in family, it changed and altered the course of my entire adult life. So when they said, "Welcome to the family," I instantly was, hi. And I didn't trust them. And it was a very pivotal moment for me to understand why that word, the F word, family, has so much tied into MST. And I did some research looking at how does RAIN, Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, how do they define incest? And they define it as sexual contact between family members. And so I started to look at this a little more. For those of you who might not know, I have a master's in rehabilitation science. I love researching. Like I will read peer-reviewed journal articles for fun. So I went in and did some research on this to really get a deeper understanding. Like, is this even being looked at? And The question that was asked is, what can keep a victim of sexual abuse by a family member from telling someone? And if we look on the military family side, the only difference is what is the word military sexual trauma, right? So it's the same, ultimately the same question. So the highlighted yellow words are the only difference. And if you look at the first line, or the second line, they may be concerned about other family members' reactions, fearing they won't be believed, or will be accused of doing something wrong. And if you look on the military side, the only difference to that is service members. When I put these side by side and started to look at this, I started to realize that that might be one of the missing links, is that we're not necessarily always talking about this as being an incestual issue. And we know that MST is really difficult, right? But we don't always discuss why is it so difficult. And it has to do in large part with, because those were my brothers in service. These are my sisters in service. If that happens to the people that are supposed to be my family, then why wouldn't I react in the same way? Or why wouldn't a survivor react in a similar way to someone who has experienced incest? And so when you start to see that, there's a new compassion that one has. There's a new understanding. When you look at these side by side, you start to really get an idea of, oh, that's what makes it so uniquely different. And also a lot more challenging when we're thinking about how we approach healing. So just want to pause here. We defined MST. We talked about the prevalence, the pervasive nature, and the effects, and what makes it distinct from other forms of sexual trauma. I want to check in with everyone and see, does anyone have any questions at this point before we move on? Yes?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research myself. It does look like greater than 50%.
Come from what? Yes. Yes, which makes the family part an even closer. Now we're talking about not distant cousins, but almost the immediate family feeling. So yes. And throughout, I forgot to mention in the beginning, throughout this, because there's so much info in here, I'm going to kind of pause every few slides and see if we have questions. So anybody else? Any other questions before we move on? Okay. And again, you will all have copies of this. So let's move on to the impact, right? So the impact is felt on multiple levels. We already talked about like the intergenerational trauma. I can speak from experience and say that when I initially got out, it was 16 years between the time I got out of service and the time that I was granted the ability to have mental health services, because I was told, you're no longer a veteran, you don't rate. I got out in 2000. And it was at a time when it was not, nobody was talking about MST. Nobody, there weren't all the things that there are now. So I spent 16 years knowing that something was wrong, but not quite understanding what. And that trickled down to my 3 children. And as I got healthier, I started educating them on, oh, mom had PTSD, mom had this, and learning, but the damage had kind of already been done. So there is, I know I can speak from experience and say that there was definitely intergenerational trauma as a result of what I experienced. How does that impact family functioning? Parenting, parent-infant bonding can be affected. And I want to highlight disenfranchised grief. Has anyone ever heard of that word before? Disenfranchised grief? Are some of you pretty familiar with it? Okay, so disenfranchised grief and bereavement among survivors of MST, it's the lack of recognition in the loss experiences after sexual assault for survivors, right? It's when you go and someone talks to you and they talk to you about a trauma that you went through, but they don't necessarily pay much attention to all the things that one lost along the way. Sometimes people can lose, like I say, when I went, I was told, well, you're no longer a veteran. So I was like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, you also don't get any rights to health benefits of any kind or any service-connected benefits. They took my Montgomery GI Bill because I got out in 23 months versus 24 months. There was a significant loss. It wasn't just leaving the military. And then there was that loss of, well, what am I going to do now? I went in thinking I was G.I. Jane and I was going to spend 20 years in the Marine Corps, and I come out at 19 going, okay, new life plan, right? So losing a lot of those things, or realizing years later as one is going through the claims process, then you have to detail how has it impacted your life, and you're starting to make that list of loss, and there it is all over again. So disenfranchised grief and the ability to not really sit down and take the time to grieve some of those losses can impact people in different ways. So the challenges of reporting, we all know that there is a lower reporting rate. It's gotten better over the years. It's certainly better than when I was in. But there are still factors that contribute to why people, even today in 2024, still don't report. And some of those factors can be a fear of retaliation, social ostracism. You don't want to be that person in the unit who reports. You might be afraid that it will damage your career. And having to choose between reporting sexual assault or losing your career at 18 years, that's a choice no one should have to make. Feeling sometimes like, well, is it my fault if I was drinking that night, or if I was wearing this or I did that? And even though we're taught not to think that way, it's still that sometimes we blame ourselves. And so we won't report based on what's going on in our committee, in our heads. There's a lack of trust that it might not be taken seriously. Like, what if I get the guts to say something, and then all of a sudden I do and no one takes me serious, and they just kind of push it under the rug? What do I do then once it's already out? And then some systemic barriers can be the military justice system. So again, this is one of those things I learned firsthand, that the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is not something that most 19-year-olds have an understanding of how to navigate. It takes time to understand the different law system that the military has. And if you don't know some of those things and you don't have an advocate, and you're trying to go through that process, it can be difficult where you go, I don't even know if I want to open that door. We're doing good on time. Okay, so re-traumatization. This is often, I don't want to say overlooked, but not the first thing on people's minds when we're thinking about or discussing healing for MST. So re-traumatization can happen in a number of different ways. Not everyone goes through the same thing. Not everyone's impacted in the same way. But some of the things that can happen is when we take an approach to healing MST or treating it, and we do it the same way that we might be healing other traumas or other conditions, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everyone needs a different approach that suits them, and not everybody's always ready to jump right in. Some people may want to explore through art therapy, through surf therapy, through other types of modalities, and then get to the point where they want to explore through talk therapy. So during intimacy, right? And so I'm talking about non-sexual intimacy. During intimate moments when survivors are meeting somebody and they're dating and they're starting that thing of like, can I trust this person? Do I want to see them again? How much should I tell them? That can definitely be re-traumatizing, because it's at what point in time is it appropriate to bring this up? When should I say something? This is something that I've talked about for years, and it's not talked about enough. And it's that during sexual intimacy, right? And we're talking about physical intimacy. One could be in the midst of the moment with their partner, and their partner could do absolutely nothing to cause the other individual, who's a survivor, to have a thought, a feeling, a moment where all of a sudden they were in one space, things were good, and then a thought comes in their mind and they go, oh no, this is not the right time to say something. I don't know if I should. And all of a sudden it's kind of like the body, emotion, everything changes, right? And oftentimes survivors will not say something in that moment. And so I run a women's group, and we've talked about this for years, that can be re-traumatizing, because there you are, your internal instinct is saying, I'm now uncomfortable. This person has done nothing to make me uncomfortable, but I'm now uncomfortable. And so we've talked about, well, that would be a perfect time to say, I need a glass of water, right? To just something to interrupt the moment, to take a breath and to be able to step back and go, I need a second. I just need a minute. You did nothing wrong. And to have those conversations before intimacy with your partner so that you can let them know, yes, I understand it's been 25 years, but this stuff still comes up. And I don't want to be in the midst of a moment and not be able to say, I need a minute. So I need a glass of water as a nice interruption so that the survivor doesn't re-traumatize themselves. Few other things are not allowing survivors to come out of the MST box. That's what I call it. It's when you will meet somebody and they're a public figure or they're representing an organization and they're talking about their experience, but it's almost as if they're never allowed to come out of that, right? And I spent years like going to Washington, D.C. and trying to do a bunch of things and get laws passed and go there and lobby. And then I was like, well, I really want to kind of dive into the art phase more. And it was almost as if I was told, well, yeah, but we see you as the survivor. Like you're the poster girl for MST kind of thing. So you don't get to go and now talk about art. And that for me was super difficult, was that even when I would showcase artwork, somebody would Google my name and it would come back, oh, you went through this, even if I didn't mention it in an interview. And then they would put it in their interview, in their write-up, and it was all over, even when I didn't say that I wanted it in there. So not allowing a survivor to come out of that MST box is a way that we sometimes as a society will re-traumatize. Lack of trauma-informed healthcare. So this is something that I'm actually quite excited to share because I think it's important for people to hear. When veterans are going through VA healthcare, it is important to understand that oftentimes things that we don't think are related to MST very much are and can be extremely re-traumatizing, like dental appointments. Why do you think one would have a problem laying down in a position with someone over them examining their mouth? It can be really re-traumatizing. And we're often not connecting, we're not making that connection between why does this veteran keep missing their appointments? They schedule them, but they never show up, or they show up and they're in a bad mood, or they leave halfway through and they don't say anything. It's because re-traumatization can happen during dental appointments, during medical sedation or intubation. If someone has to go for a procedure where they're going to be IV sedated, and their experience is that maybe they went through an experience where they were drugged and assaulted, that experience of going for a routine procedure can be re-traumatizing, and we don't always make those connections. And then things like, obviously, mammograms, routine OBGYN care, routine screenings for prostate cancer, things like this. When we're looking at or examining the intimate parts of someone's body, obviously these things can, again, re-traumatize a survivor who has been through something, whether it was a year ago or 30 years ago. And so it's just better that we kind of have these conversations and discuss this stuff so it doesn't come as a surprise, especially has anyone thought about that before with dental? Why dental would be difficult? But does it make sense? So the more we know, I think the better. We can move on. So we're getting ready for part 2. And I'm just going to go over this one. What was that? Oh, yes.
Because
yes.
just writing the letter or documenting what happened.
Yes.
And then when you get there, the person hasn't even looked at it and wants you to tell the whole story.
Yes.
All over again. And then you're traumatized for more because you don't have a therapist.
Absolutely.
What can we do? What can we do to fix
that? Is a great question. So I remember years ago going to Washington, D.C. and speaking to Kamala Harris's office about that. And what I explained to them was, and this was in 2016 when I was going through the claims process. And I said, I just did an intent to file, and I was told I have 1 year to turn in all of my documents. And within that year, I was expected to start at that point they said you can start mental health treatment from something that happened 16 years prior. At the same time, we'd like you to contact everybody you know from your service. We'd like you to get this. We'd like you to fill out all these VA form, ... And you have 1 year to do all of this. I'm not quite sure how to solve that problem because I think that puts an enormous amount of undue pressure on someone to, excuse my language, but like get their shit together in a year. And that's not always, some people aren't ready in the first year, right? Some people are ready to do the paperwork, but they're not ready to make that phone call and say, hey, you know, we served together this year and I need you to write a statement. Remember that night? Those things aren't, the expectation that everyone can do it in a year, again, is, I think the best thing we can do is trying to advocate for why a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And veterans should be allowed within that intent to file for an extension. Like, hey, guess what? I'm doing the mental health. I've got some of the paperwork done. It's day 364, but I'm still not ready. I need more time. That might be one way that we can solve it, to extend the time so that each veteran and each survivor can take their time and go through the process they need. If I had a magic wand, I would wave it and change that immediately. But I think education about the importance of what the process looks like and why it can be so difficult, and conversations around it, right? Taking this information out of the room to people who might not know, and advocating, I think, is the best way to kind of solve that. So I hope that answers your question. So non-death loss, we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but just really emphasizing the idea of talking to people about grief, asking people about where they are in the grieving process. And then, you know, when someone passes and we have like a celebration of life and a wake and things like that, every culture does things different, right? Every culture across the globe, we all have some form of how we deal with and process through grief and loss during times of death. We all do it, no matter where we live. But we don't always do that when people have, you know, if someone gets divorced, there's a loss. If someone loses a house to a fire, there's a loss. If someone gets assaulted when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, there's a loss, right? And so the ability to kind of have conversations around asking people, where are you in the grieving process? Have you grieved? Talking to survivors and asking them, great, you know, you're in mental health, you're working on the PTSD. Has anyone talked to you about grief? And oftentimes people go, ugh, nobody likes the G word or the F word, right? Grief and family, two things we don't like. But I think that it's really important to have those discussions. So this takes me into part 2. Do we have any questions before we move ahead? Yes. It's feeling a little cooler, yes. I've got my cold water up here. Thank you. It could be worse. Yes.
So I should have asked this after your first part. I am a survivor of both incest abuse and MST, and I'm curious, because from my own experience, I'm curious what studies have been done or research has been done into the psychology of a veteran. And what I mean by that is, you know, we're talking about loss, and for me and through my healing journey, I'm very much so on the other side of things. And the loss and what you're talking about, 100%, I align with that. But what I found in the root of all of that is the true loss has been in the loss of my identity, yes. Both within my childhood and within my military experience. However, the part that has really stood out to me is that as a child, when you lose your identity, it's not really your responsibility. It's the responsibility of your parents. When you have an outburst, it's the responsibility of your parents to control that, you know, whatever,
Mhm.
discipline. When you're a military member, you know, I don't have a background in psychology, but your psychology changes. And one of the main things in basic training that they do is they break you down up.
Yes.
And they teach you that you are your own responsibility. You are in charge of yourself. And so I'm wondering what kind of studies have done in the psychology of that, because part of, for me, not reporting that is that this is my thing to deal with. This is my bad behavior. This is my responsibility to continue to act in the way that I need to be a soldier, to be a part of the team, because I cannot be a part of the team as a broken piece. And so I'm curious if they've looked into that type of psychology, because even when we're talking about grief, why would I need to grieve? Because it's my responsibility to act right. I'm a soldier. I have been taught to persevere through anything. I'm America's strongest warrior. And I've been taught to survive war. I've been taught to survive in the field. I've been taught to survive gunfights and those types of things. So I should be able to also be able to survive bad feelings and behavior that makes me act in a way that's actually not a part of who I am.
So I think there's been, first off, for women veterans specifically, there's definitely not enough research, right? That's just across the board. We lack in research. But I think certain industries, like if you're looking at art therapy and studying veterans in the context of like art therapy or equine therapy or specific therapeutic areas, there's research, but as a kind of overreaching that, like you're saying, as a whole, I don't think there's been a whole lot of it. And I've spent over 50 hours putting this together, trying to find the exact research that you're talking about. I can tell you that it's limited. I mean, I went into, there's a slide in a few that will show you just some of the things that I pulled from research, but to answer your question, there's not enough there yet. My hope is in 10 years, it won't be that way. But I think that people who are doing that kind of research just need to know, like, we need that. We really do need to understand those things. And it just, right now, I was not able to find, I was looking for a very similar thing. And what I came up with is that you'll find research for specific topics and specific therapeutic approaches, but a full-on understanding in that way just doesn't yet exist, especially not for women veterans. But great question. Yes?
Has there been any research into survivors of MST then co-parenting for 18 to 20 years with that person, with the children that are as a result of MST?
Not that I've found. Not that there, like the specific research in specific demographics, when it comes to MST, there's limited information, which is upsetting. But that was something that was a frustration even when I was kind of trying to put this together. Are there specific demographics looking at things? And there's limited, not to say it isn't there, but I haven't seen anything on that yet, and my hope is that we will in the future, and that there are some people in here who geek out on research just like me and try to say this is something I really want to go ahead and research, but I had a difficult time finding some specific information like that.
I was curious if there's going to be some laws, hopefully in the future, that says if you're a survivor of MST, then you don't have to co-parent with that person.
That would be, again, if I had a magic wand, I'd be waving that all over. Yes.
I just want to say one other thing, that I really appreciate this, and that it really does start with awareness. And I want to say that in regards to the VA claim, I was just awarded my 100% disability this year.
Congratulations.
Due to MST. And I will say that in regards to what you were talking about with Kamala Harris, and presenting to the White House, that I may be a one-off, I may have gotten lucky, but I will tell you guys that my VA claim went very well, and it was very smooth, and the doctor was very compassionate.
I'm very happy to hear that.
So I'm hoping that will give some people hope here, and
yes.
It does really start with this awareness here, and letting veterans know that it is okay to talk about MST, and that it happens more times than not, and that sometimes when we start normalizing MST and we start, talk about it, that it does give those veterans a push into the VA claim. And I think the VA is moving into the right ropes with that. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm hoping that's hopeful for people, and I just felt the need to share my personal experience in a very recent time.
I'm glad you did. When I went through this, I filed my claim in 2012 and my claim was approved in 2016. It was a very, very different time, and every appointment I went to, the first question was, what is MST? I'm like, but you're the professional. What do you mean? So, and it has changed significantly. So I'm really glad to hear that that process was easier. I think a lot of what was happened over the last 10 years is changing that process to make it not so traumatic, to make it where there aren't these like hard rules of you have a year, you have to do this, and you have to do it alone. That's the other thing. I did so much of this alone because so many of the programs that exist today didn't exist. So I'm very happy to hear that. And I said congratulations because I have 100%, and I know it allows us to have the freedom then to work on whatever it is we choose.
And
so
really just the validation that what happened was real.
Yes, absolutely. So part 2, yes, go ahead. Yes. We will definitely be hitting post-traumatic growth. It's one of my favorite things by Dr. Richard Tedeschi. So we will get to that. And now you all find out what a geek I am under covers. No one knows. But so we're going to go to part 2, describing, explaining, identifying, and discussing what exactly a comprehensive approach to healing MST looks like. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of go through these a little quicker. So the comprehensive approach, it's important to emphasize that healing is a unique journey for every single individual survivor. There is nobody who does it the exact same way, right? Everyone has a unique journey, and a comprehensive approach should be tailored to their individual needs and their individual preferences. These are like the main 5 components that should ideally be inside every healing journey, right? And so it starts with specialized mental health care. Physical health care is super important. Having support services, offering support on legal and justice, like advocacy, legal assistance, protection orders if necessary. And then holistic healing, which is one of my favorite things. It's all the alternative approaches to healing. And let's go ahead and move to the next one. So again, just a reminder, you're going to get these. So if you're reading something and I move ahead, you'll be able to see this after. So why individualized care plans? So here's why tailoring care plans to specific needs is extremely important. So trauma experiences vary. Individual needs vary. Some people might struggle with PTSD. Some people might struggle with grief, and some people might not. Some people may experience chronic pain. Some people don't. Some people have relationship issues, and some don't. It's never the same for any 2 people. Preferences and coping mechanisms. So being able to allow survivors to have more control over their healing journey and what works for them is probably like the #1 most important thing, right? If somebody is afraid of horses, we're not going to insist that they do equine therapy. And in the same way, someone may say, look, I'm just not into art. I'm not going to sit there and say, well, I love art, so I think that would be wonderful for you and you should sign up. No, I'm going to respect that and say, okay, that's not your thing. But the person might say, but I love the ocean. And they'll say, oh, okay, have you ever done surf therapy? So really kind of leaning into what the person's individual preferences are and not trying to put on them what works for us is very helpful. And then understanding that healing is not a linear process, right? I can be okay today, and this is a perfect example I'll share with you. So I just went to go see my son graduate Army boot camp. Amazing time in a mom's life, right? Me and my husband are there, we're watching him, and I'm just amazing week. And I get a phone call from the attorneys that are working on my case right now to get my my discharge from general under honorable to honorable, send me an email and say, hey, we need you to write a personal statement. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll take care of it. You know, I'll send it to you Monday morning. We need it right away. Oh, okay, well, I'm in Missouri and I'm trying to like be here and see my son graduate. And regardless of all the healing I did, I was standing in the bedroom and I was on the phone with my friend Trina, crying my eyes out and going, I know all these things and like I teach this, I don't understand, but I totally understand. I know where this is coming from. I know that regardless of how much work I've done or for how long I've done it, this is not easy. They're asking me to write how this has impacted my life 20 plus years later. And so it's not a linear process, right? You don't get to a certain point of healing and you're like, oh, got that all done. You know what I mean? It can come up at any time. So let me go ahead and move on to different treatment options that are currently being offered through the VA. And these are evidence-based therapies that are currently being offered for mental health diagnoses related to MST, right? Because again, I want to reiterate, MST is not a diagnosis in itself. So what's currently being offered is on this list, prolonged exposure, CPT, EMDR, CBT. You can take a look at all of this. I'm not going to read you all the acronyms, but these are the current things that are being offered that are evidence-based therapy. So, oh my gosh, I almost knocked the podium over. Okay, so I told you I'm on this box. I'm only human. So some additional treatment options that oftentimes we can see offered, especially through nonprofits. And there are some actually here. There are nonprofits all across the US that are offering some of these amazing alternative treatment options. Everything on this list I have tried. And so I did not want to put something on here and say that it potentially works if I didn't personally experience it. The number one thing on here, Renee, you had brought that up earlier, post-traumatic growth. For those of you who may not be familiar with Dr. Richard Tedeschi, he did amazing work with bereaved parents. And what he learned is that these parents who had lost children in all kinds of different horrific ways, these parents who rightfully so were in deep, deep, deep grief also showed some of the most incredible signs of post-traumatic growth, meaning that, yes, did they go through the grief? Did they have PTSD? Did they have these things? Yes, but who they became as a result and what they did with their lives as a result of the trauma was nothing short of a miracle for a lot of these families. And so Dr. Richard Tedeschi studied PTG for a long time and kind of, he ended up coming together with, it's called Boulder Crest Foundation. And I was lucky enough to go through their program many years ago. And they taught me a very important thing, which is it's not what's wrong with you. It's just what happened to you. And it's just how you were trained and by who. And leading up to that, that was in 2017, 17 years I spent thinking, it's just what's wrong with me. Like, no one might know it, but like send me to Walmart on a bad day and you'll see it, you know, but it's just that thing that's wrong with me. And I show up and that was the first thing they taught me is, no, it's actually not that. It's just what happened to you. That's all it is. And it's how you were trained to respond to what happened to you and who trained you to do that. And what they reminded me is you're a Marine Corps veteran, girl. Like if you can be trained in that way, we can train you in a different way to understand that's not who you are. You are not your trauma. And we can retrain you to look at things in a different way. And that literally was one of the most pivotal moments where I realized like, oh, post-traumatic growth is a thing. And it's a fun thing. That means I can go out surfing and reteach myself to, one, trust myself, to number two, that my fear is sometimes a good thing, right? If I'm paddling out and I see a shark fin, it's a good thing to have that, like that fear feeling and go, that's probably not what I want to paddle to, right? Or if there's a big wave come, I think, did this turn off?
No, you're good.
Okay. the fear factor, right? I used to look at that as like, oh my gosh, I'm scared of everything everywhere I go. And I learned to see that some of those things that were a result of trauma can actually work in my benefit. So post-traumatic growth is amazing. Art therapy, accelerated resolution therapy, that was something phenomenal. Being able to rebuild the imagery in one's mind around a terrible moment and seeing it a little bit different and changing the imagery that goes on in the brain. I've done trauma-informed yoga. I've done all forms of equine therapy. Surf therapy is my absolute favorite. I surf like 5 days a week. Art therapy too. When I'm not in the ocean, I'm doing some form of art or teaching. And drama therapy. I found a lot of healing through drama therapy in a couple of different ways, but mostly because what it allowed me to do was be vulnerable in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. And I realized that there's a lot of healing when I got through that, and I went, oh, I can do this. It was pretty exciting to experience some of these. So don't take my word for it. I told you I'm a research geek. So I put down all of the last 5 years of peer-reviewed journal articles specific to everything that I just showed you in all of these, and you have access to look at all of these different reports and see what they say. This is just my shameless plug on how fun research can be, but I'm going to leave this up for a second. We reviewed a comprehensive approach to individualized care plan, treatment options, alternative treatment options. Are there any questions before I move on? Okay. Does anyone else in here geek out on research, maybe? Oh, yes. All right. There's some people. Good job. So feel free to read any of those. Yes?
Good question. I love the comprehensive approach to using individualized care plan. I think those are critical. Helping somebody find their own success, but I'm not seeing a lot of places case management. When I'm talking to people in the WA and the DA office, how can you get someone to help find someone wellness based on their situation when they can't do it themselves? You know, if anyone's talking about that gap that people fall into.
That is an incredible question, because that is something that I myself have wondered. I don't know. I can tell you that in California it is, and I'm from Oceanside, California. I am not sure if that's happening here in the state of Washington. If anyone does know, I would encourage them to share that information. What I can tell you is that I have found that to be one of the more difficult aspects. And where would this like come up? So perfect example, if I need to go for dental work and I'm choiced out, right? I would love to have a case manager that would be able to explain on my behalf, this is why this veteran, number one, needs to have an appointment that's not too far from home, that needs to see a female provider, that needs specific instructions for when you wake her up from sedation. And what ends up happening, I'm in the choice program. I get connected with a dental office. I go in there expecting that it's been talked about. And then it's, oh no, you weren't approved for sedation. You weren't approved for this, or we don't even know about this. Having a case manager that can work with survivors, to somebody not just to advocate for me on that half for dental, but somebody to also get me connected with like an art program in my area. I don't live in South San Diego. I live in North San Diego. And if you've ever been in San Diego, there's not a huge like mileage distance, but it can be a good 2-hour drive on the 5, depending on the time of day, the traffic in the car you're driving. And so am I going to take an art program down in South San Diego that might be 45 minutes long with an hour and 20-minute drive and then traffic up? No. So having a case manager would be amazing. I know they've done it because my husband was a 20-year, 3-time combat vet. And when he initially got out, he had a case manager. He had somebody to help walk him through and do these things and work with his TBI. And it's not something I've seen where there are case managers assigned to survivors to provide a more comprehensive approach and to advocate and to kind of fill in some of those gaps. The best thing I could say is we're having this conversation together, so leave this room and talk people's ear off. Advocate, talk about it, ask questions. If they don't know, good, who would know? And then go find that person, find their email. Like, I would just suggest continuing to have these conversations is the way that the hope is in a couple years, these things start to change. Great question. Yes.
Well, I'm a counselor, full-time and part-time help to on a hard time. Nursing care, I can get her with MST, you know, me. The VA is big and fast. You don't want to go to the VA. You find it really from the health. How do you connect with resources? It's kind of, you lose it.
And we actually do have. So we do have people.
So we're going to look at now the role of support services and community in long-term recovery from MST. So I'm just going to highlight these things real quick. These key roles in support services, immediate support and stabilization through crisis intervention, advocacy, advocating for survivors' rights and needs, connection to resources, emotional support, providing safe spaces, and helping to reduce feelings of isolation. And then some practical assistance like housing, healthcare, and addressing immediate needs to reduce stress, kind of like you were just talking about. And then key roles of community. So who is community? It's not just the nonprofits or organizations. It's actually us as individuals as part of the community. So that would be through a sense of belonging, right? Like survivors want to be oftentimes part of a community for connection. There's empathy and understanding that can be built within community where survivors are accepted and they're believed. And oftentimes when they come together, they don't have to give you all the details. They can just say, this happened. And people can understand who've been through that. Like, okay, I understand your struggle. I don't need to know all the details, but you told me and shared with me that you're a survivor. That means I know what you went through, so I'm here. Normalizing the experiences like you were talking about, that is so important, and I think that that's what we're doing here today. Reminding people that it's not their fault, and that, you know, oftentimes just sharing with someone, like even if you yourself didn't go through it, being able to share and thank somebody for sharing with you, or saying, you know, I may not have gone through this and I don't generally understand everything about it, but how can I best support you? What do you need? Is there anybody, you know, is there anybody I can kind of connect you with? So role modeling is super important in terms of demonstrating how do we have healthy relationships after something so traumatic. And not all of us go through something like that and then have really healthy marriages. Like it just, I hate to say it, but it happens that way, where relationships are damaged because the core trust of ourselves and other individuals becomes damaged. And then advocating for one another. And I'd like to share with you kind of an example of some super healthy community. So my best friend, Trina McDonald, was in the documentary a while back called The Invisible War. And I am so lucky to call her my best friend. She lives in Washington. I met Trina years ago, and we met on a mountaintop in Caliente, California. I got an email, do you want to come gentle wild Mustangs? And I was like, I guess. I don't really know what that entails, but sure. And I got to meet Trina, and for the first time, I met another individual where I was like, you don't seem sad all the time. I kind of like that about you. And she's like, yeah, you too. And I said, don't tell anyone, but like, I think I'm secretly doing okay, right? Like, don't go report it. But we talked about this idea of like, why do we have such a hard time sharing with one another that as a result of the support I've gotten from my disability, I'm doing better. And it's okay to say that I'm doing better, right? Like I was like, I know the people are out there, so we've got to find them. And can we actually bond through our post-traumatic growth as opposed to trauma bonding? And so Trina and I came up with the Veterans Wellness Project back in 2019. We launched the first call in January 1st of 2020. And every single Tuesday since 2020, we get on a Zoom call for an hour. And we created this template that's done. Literally, we try to stick to our 1 hour call. We decided that 1 hour would be the best. Sometimes we go a few minutes over, but the way that we design the template is to remain within an hour. And we highlight 4 main areas. So the 4 areas are self-care now. We put these questions together. We spent almost a year kind of coming up with this, but we ask everyone on the call, describe what you're currently doing for self-care. What is it? Why do you enjoy it? Is it something you do with others or something you do alone? And how has it helped you? And then everybody sort of shares. We move on. We talk about challenges and barriers because those come up every week. And we ask, what was the challenge or barrier? How did you overcome it? My favorite question. Is it preventable? And what did you learn from it? And so we ask survivors to, and this call is specific for women veterans, but we ask them to really think about, are these challenges and barriers that keep coming up week after week, are they preventable? And oftentimes the great part about this is we're just sharing what works and what doesn't. And we're not trying to diagnose anyone. We have some really strict ground rules. I know it's like, might be hard to see on there, but one of our ground rules is no trauma talk or stories to include suicidal ideation, rape, or domestic violence. We are so against the idea of trauma bonding or trigger warning. We want people to be able to come to the call and feel safe. And the thing we do at the end is my favorite. We talk about goal setting and gratitude. So literally my cheeks hurt by the end of the call because we're all just giggling and laughing. And it's an amazing celebration where week after week, we get to experience one another's highs and lows and share that. And nobody gets on the call and is like, everything's great. I've got no challenges and barriers to my self-care for the week. It's never happened. I don't think anyone's gotten on the call and done that. But the focus is, how are you taking care of yourself today? What's getting in the way? How can you get it out of the way? What is your goal for next week? And what are you grateful for about your own self-care and recovery from trauma? And what are you grateful for about this group? So I would encourage anyone interested to join us. We have a fun time on the call. And Trina and I are so funny because I have a New York accent. I was raised in New York and she's from Kentucky. So we go... Originally, she was from Kentucky, so we go strong on our accents sometimes. So the significance of access to resource for MST survivors. Why is the access significant? It facilitates healing. It empowers survivors, prevents re-traumatization, and promotes resilience. So I just jumped through these very quickly. I'll tell you why, because I want to get to part 3. But good news, you get the PDF so you can sit and read all of those individually. That's going to take me over to part 3, and this is the interactive portion of the workshop. So I'm going to just explain and describe real quick how creative arts engagement offers healing for MST survivors, and then we're going to jump into the interactive portion. So I'll give you the definition of creative expression, and I should have mentioned earlier, I teach art professionally, so this is kind of this is where you're going to see me smile a little bit more. So creative expressions, the ability to use our imagination and skill to produce something new and original. The key characteristics are obviously originality, using one's imagination. As adults, we forget to play. We forget to go out and let that little 8-year-old in us come on out and play around and play with clay or get, paint all over us, stuff like that, or go play in the ocean. So the idea of play and using our imagination is part of a characteristic of creative expression, self-expression, and then process-oriented, right? So it's not just about, when I teach art, I don't teach people to make something. I teach them to understand the journey that brought them to make what they make, right? This was not, none of these are about, I want you to make a mask and I want it to be this color and I want it to be that. It's more about what's going on within you, what is getting in your own way, how do you get out of your way to let that actually come out of you. So it's more about the journey of creation than just the end product. So creative expression there's various examples of this in the veteran population, and I've seen this throughout veterans from this state. I work with mostly veterans from Washington, but I have seen work come out of veterans across the entire US. And to my surprise, some of the most interesting art that you might not think of right away when you think of what's art. Most people get stuck in that like visual art box of painting and drawing, but playing a musical instrument, journaling, poetry, performance art like we got to see today, comedy, specific crafts like glass art. I'm also a glass mosaic artist, so I love glass art. And then digital media. Those are just some different, these are just some of the examples. Culinary art is not on this list. Landscape design is not on this list. A number of different art, woodworking, things like that. And these are the benefits of creative arts engagement. So the biggest one being that it builds self-esteem and offers a greater ability to express one's emotions. You know how they say a picture's worth 1,000 words? Take a look at these masks for a second. There's a whole bunch of emotion that comes through in those, and the person's not speaking to you. The artwork itself is. So creative expression, how can creative arts facilitate healing? Well, obviously we just saw, right, nonverbal expression, but there's also the ability to build resilience. Every veteran I work with has at some point throughout their artistic journey mentioned that they found new meaning, right? And one of the things I do, it's a little secret, because veterans are so used to titles, right? I'm at this, this is my rank, this is what I'm at. I start with a new title and I call everybody artists. From the first day you come into my class, your new title is artist. And a lot of people go, yeah, I'm not an artist. I'm like, cool, but we're gonna write an artist statement and an artist bio and a description of work, and they don't even see themselves week 1, 2, or 3 as artists, and week 8, they're presenting this amazing artwork. We have some of it from the SAP grant in the art gallery, but it always amazes me how veterans will tell me, like, I'm not an artist, but in my spare time, I make cupcakes and I do this and I make wedding cakes, and I'm like, and you don't see yourself as an artist? Oh no, because I can't paint and draw, but I do all this stuff with, you know, fondant and what, and I'm like, you know, you're an artist, right? And so I'll spend 8 weeks trying to drill in the idea that we all have some sort of artistic ability within us. And it definitely is, it comes out when we use that creative approach to start using that as a tool for healing from trauma. Creative arts, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and skip through these just because I'd really like us to have enough time. So let me look really quick. The importance of incorporating art into the healing process for MST survivors. Here's what I will say. If incorporating art for veterans was not important, then we would not be partnering with Art Swap at this conference. I'll leave this slide for you to look at another time, but I want to kind of highlight creative arts as a therapeutic modality for healing from any sort of trauma. Creative arts as a whole for expressing oneself. Those things are so vitally important. And if we look at the creative arts almost in the same way as we look at general physical health care, they're really not much different, right? They're taking care of the individual in a very unique and personal way. So mask making, there's actually quite a bit of research I was happy to find on why mask making is really important, especially within the veteran community. It's already been looked at and studied, mask making for combat trauma. I have spent the last several years since 2021 working with Path with Art, doing mask making for invisible wounds. And most of the students I work with, what comes out is the mask that they've done for MST. It's not a course around MST. I don't suggest what invisible wound they do, but the outcome is usually a mask that represents some form of MST. So this is, again, you guys can see this later. This is just the class description of the class I teach with, Path with Art. It's an 8-week course offered 100% online, and all materials are provided at no charge to the participants. And now we get to the fun part. So we've got 20 minutes left. We're going to divide in 4 groups. So I'm going to have this half of the room kind of come together up here. The back half of the room is going to be group 2. Y'all over here are going to kind of be group 3, and then group 4. What I'm going to do, I've got these sheets over here, the giant Post-its. So you're each going to get a folder, and inside that folder is going to be, each group is going to get a folder. And inside your folder, you're going to have 6 individual masks. And as a group, I want you to spend about 5 to 7 minutes analyzing the masks. And as a group, I want you to look at the masks. I'm not giving you any information other than they were created by a veteran. That's all you get to know right now. In a little bit, I'll let you know what the actual mask was. But I want you to consider the following questions after hearing all of this. What emotions or experiences might the mask represent? What invisible wounds or challenges might the individual be trying to convey? And how does the mask form, color, and materials contribute to its meaning? You're also going to get everything that's on here is printed out, because I was like, there's no way everybody's going to remember that. So you're going to get a printed instruction form in there as well. Once you divide into your groups, I'm going to ask that you pick one person, one brave person, to represent your group. And then I'm going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to kind of work together on this. And then I'd like to hear from each individual group. Out of all the masks that you get to look at, each group gets 6. I want you all to pick one. And that one mask, I'd like somebody from your group to kind of stand up and present and answer those 3 questions. It doesn't have to be long. I know we're out of here at 2:30, so I'm going to try to move along with this. But all of the information in here is going to be inside the packets, and you guys can take one or more of the markers up there. And each group can take the big giant Post-its and sort of write things down. Where are we on this? Let me go back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this up. What's half? Okay, we'll leave that. What's half the room? Let's have this divide. So this will be group 1. You guys are group 1. You guys back here will be group 2, group 3, and group 4. Does that work? Okay, so I'm going to ask one of you from each group to kind of come up. If you guys can, we were supposed to have tables, whatever, but kind of huddle together. Feel free to move your chairs around.
Can I help with anything?
Yes, please. Okay. Okay, what group are you from? Group 4? Here you go. Give you 2 of these and 1 of these. Group 3, okay. And then you want to take those. See who group 1. Are you in group 1?
No, I'm going to help facilitate anything that you need.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Group 1. I need somebody from group 2.
A couple of pins, right?
Group 2? Group 3 got their. Okay, somebody from group 2. So that's.
You want to go?
Yeah, that'd be great. And here you go.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate it. That one? Everybody agree? All right, that one it is. All right, what group number are you? Group 4. And what mask did you choose? Fire. Ooh. Yay, I get to share with you what the mask is. All right, thank you.
All right.
Three. 1. Group 2, just to check with you again. Y'all pick this one, right? Okay. All right, you all have 1 minute to go. So, one final minute. And then make sure each of you pick one person from your group who's going to very briefly share the answers to those 3 questions based on the mask you chose.
To show, or are they just going to kind of talk from the groups?
They can just talk from the groups, yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, you have about 30 seconds. If one of you from the groups can start taking the photos and put them all back into the thing, the envelope, and then go ahead and, I don't care if everybody leaves their chairs where they're at, that's fine. Fine by me. Whoop, there we go. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started because I want to have enough time to give you some of the information. So let's start real quick with group 1. Who's your person? All right, group 1. Okay, so I'm going to give you the mic so you get to know how uncomfortable this is. Here, are you ready?
Will you hold these so that I can... Hello, we're group 1, and thank you. We're looking at this mask and what emotions or experience might the mask represent. We were really talking about this really strong exterior of patriotism and travel and the external projection. But then on the inside of this particular mask, we can see that it's a lot darker on the inside. There's a lot of inward points, and it looks like there's a lot of internalized pain, but the external projection is that everything is fine. And we talked about how the form and the color has this interesting thing where the exterior and the interior is very different, especially in color and contrast.
I'm going to trade that. Mask number 1 is made by amazing Navy veteran friend of mine who said that the inspiration for this art piece was used to aid me in recovery from physical and mental illness. It is also used to help celebrate my honorable discharge from military service. Inside of the mask focuses on my invisible wounds, while the outside of the mask represents my patriotic military service. What does this mean to me? I was robbed of my pride, celebration, and accomplishments from my service due to trauma inflicted by supposed comrades. What else can I tell you about this? This veteran said, I was rushed out of service while being mistreated and isolated from my command. I was made to believe that I was at fault for everything that occurred. I was also misdiagnosed for my disabilities that led to 25 years of hell following my service. Being able to look back at my invisible wounds and look at the service I gave to my country, I was provided with internal healing and renewed positive feelings for my service. Excellent job, number 1. All right, number 2. Group 2, come on up. I changed my mind last minute, so that's how it works. All right, I will take this, give you this. Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
The emotions and the experiences that we saw in this picture: numbness, silence, isolation, confusion, trapped, pain, darkness, and fear. Number 2, the invisible wounds / challenges, trust, anxiety, fear, lost, pain beneath the beauty, constraints due to the barbed wire and the mesh. And number 3, contributions, what contributed to the meaning? How did we come to this conclusion? Barbed wire, nets, the gold toned skin, hidden behind the mesh, vulnerability, and hope we saw in this image.
Would you like to know what the mask actually is?
Absolutely.
All right, this is the fun part. So the name of this mask, thank you very much, Group 2. The name of this mask is called Imprisoned by Fear. Fear is an acronym for false evidence appearing real. Let's see, this was done by an Air Force veteran retiree. The mask is a symbol of my invisible wound. These emotions are so interrelated that it's difficult to discuss one without implying the other. For me, the fear came first, repeatedly until anxiety took over and my life became a PTSD windstorm of the two emotions. Too much, too often, with no immediate safe space where I could hide or get away. Throughout my life, I've lived through many kinds of fear and downright terror, including my own and those I've witnessed that were none the less damaging. Retired U.S. Air Force veteran. Thank you so much. Thank you. Group number 3, come on up. We're cutting it close on time, so I'm not trying to rush anyone, but go ahead.
It'll be super fast. So our group chose this mask and we looked at, I'm going to start with the materials that we looked at first. There's this like fire ring around the mask that was painted, and then there's the butterflies, and then the eyes actually look like they're broken glass or a broken mirror that's put back in there. And then on the left side there was the red that's kind of scribbly, and then there looked like, according to some of our people, that there's like this blue on the other side, which was more calm. And then there is a little bit of difference of opinion and perspective about the growth-looking tree from the forehead, and a couple of people thought it looked a little bit confusion. And so we kind of came away with these feelings of like trying to balance the harder things with the more beautiful things, and then also a kind of rebirth or transformation through to difficult circumstances. And the eyes having a different perspective based on whatever had happened to that person.
Thank you. So this mask was created by Army veteran. Oh no, Air Force veteran. This mask is called, where's the name? Oh, this mask title is called IED, Improvised Explosive Device. The invisible wound from this mask is combat PTSD and MST. Through this work, I explore the psychological and emotional impact of trauma. The blue cicadias represent the relentless ringing of bilateral tinnitus, a constant reminder of battles that never fully end. The shattered mirror symbolizes the fragmentation of my soul, irreparably broken by experiences of war and military sexual trauma. The explosive burst of color captures my internal rage and frustration, both with the circumstances that led to my suffering and with the military's decision to discharge me. And just know I'm reading the artist's statement and only part of it. Excellent. Group 4, you got one of my favorite masks. All right. Does someone want to come up from group 4? Or I can hold you. All right. There you go.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you.
So the first question was like describing the emotions that were felt, so that we saw anger, release, suppression, emptiness, and numbness. And then there was this repression, hurt, trauma, assault, TBI. And then the colors were heat. It was on top, and the armor was shattered. So let me kind of share a little bit. So this top part is fire, and it's cooler down below, but also you can't see probably from here, but it's like there was this armor around the veteran, and the armor was pushed away or shattered from them. It might be a TBI here because there's a lot of fire coming out of their head, and then the coolness seems coolness kind of coming down their face. So,
would you like to know what it is?
yes. Sure.
All right. The name of this mask, done by an Army veteran, is called Explosive Emotions. This mask represents the emotional result of trauma and the forced suppression of self, not only by the military, but by aspects of society and family. This shows the stealing of self in an impenetrable shell that we put up to protect ourselves while the sadness and anger rage inside. These powerful emotions can only be contained for so long before their explosive forces begin to wreak havoc in our lives and those around us. So, these masks speak way more than 1,000 words. I'm glad you had the opportunity to do this. This training can go anywhere from 90 minutes to 3 hours. 3 hours would have allowed us an hour to really dive in and take a look at these masks in depth. What I will say is that if this is even remotely interesting to you, the artwork, the how do we get here, the next session in 15 minutes is Design Thinking for Creative Expression. I was hired by WHAM to oversee all the grant recipients and walk them through the process of design thinking, which gives them a process for, this is the art project I want to start, this is what I need to do, and how do I actually get it all out of my head and onto a paper or a page or a canvas or whatever. So when I work with people with design thinking, oftentimes they will work on masks. And I work with Path with Art next quarter, which starts, I think registration opens in September. Next quarter starts, I believe, October 16th. I'll be teaching design thinking for creative expression through the veteran cohort. And then you'll get, if you end up applying for the grant, for the SAP grant, and you are one of the grant recipients, you get to hang with me for 6 months. So that'll be good times. But I really wanted to thank all of you for being here. Nobody gets excited about talking about MST. Like, they just don't. And when people are like, are you excited? Kind of, right? But I'm really excited to share what is possible when we step out of, talking about the, well, what is it? How do we define it? Blah, blah. And we get into the, what does the healing from it look like? And the art portion. This is the kind of stuff I love. So I hope to see some of your faces in the next workshop in about 13 minutes. But thank you so much for being here. I've got some business cards up at the front if you'd like. I really just appreciate y'all working together and being with me. So thank you so much.